Be seated if you're not already. Thanks for being here this evening. So last week I began a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount, and I talked about it as the constitution of the holy nation, which is the church. And so we looked at the Beatitudes and how that list of blessings served as sort of the preamble to the Constitution. And so it reminds us of the people that we're called to be, and it gives meaning to everything else. It's that list of Beatitudes that informs the rest of the sermon. So we have to keep in mind, as we talk over the next several weeks about the Sermon on the Mount, that it's all informed by this list that tells us about becoming a people who inherit the kingdom of heaven by being humble and righteous and peaceful and so on. All of the blessings that we looked at last week. So tonight, we're going to move on to the next section, and because I'm doing a bit of an abbreviated sermon tonight, we're looking at a very short passage, Matthew 5:13 through 16, which is just a really, really cool section. Some people's favorite verse. It's a great verse. So let me read it for us. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So, after running through the Beatitudes, the preamble, which describes, like I said, the people that we're supposed to be, Jesus then turns and offers the first challenge to his hearers. And he begins with, you are the salt of the earth. Now, I think it's very important for us to keep that phrase in context, because the phrase salt of the earth has come to take on a whole different meaning these days. And some of you, I did something on this passage a couple of years ago, and I've already used some of this material, so if you were here then, jump in and spoil it for everybody. So the phrase salt of the earth, right, does anybody kind of know, like people have heard that phrase before, right? Like, oh, that's a real salt of the earth type guy. It means a good person, a dependable and trustworthy person. And it starts here in this passage, and it sort of evolved over the years of what it means. But in Jesus' day, in the time of the Roman Empire, there's a whole different connotation to what salt is and what the salt of the earth would be. Today, salt is essentially worthless, right? There's salt on everything. It's everywhere. It's literally like you can't avoid salt. It's straight up everywhere. But in those days, salt was a little bit rarer. And it was rare enough that Roman soldiers were paid partly in salt rations. That was part of their payment. So for those who are only here for the historical trivia, that's where the phrase worth your salt comes from. Because a Roman soldier would work hard to be worth the salt that they were paid with, literally. So anyway, Jesus calling his disciples to be the salt of the earth has a whole different meaning than what we would think of when we hear salt of the earth today. Because salt was very valuable and it was rare. So salt was used, we think of salt mostly as a flavor, right? Everything is salty, that's the flavor. But salt back then was used mostly as a preservative. It was really the only way to keep your food for very long, because this was in the days before refrigeration. And in Italy, in parts of the world especially, there wasn't really ice much of the time. And so you didn't have very many ways to preserve your food. But salt was a great way to preserve meat, especially, and keep it lasting. So, what does Jesus mean when he calls his disciples the salt of the earth? For one thing, Jesus is affirming that we as Christians have a calling, in a sense, to preserve the world from rotting and decaying. As the salt of the earth, it's in our very nature to save and to preserve. And that, I think, helps us to understand what Jesus means when he's talking about salt losing its saltiness in the next verse. Because salt that doesn't preserve food, salt that doesn't do what salt does, isn't salt anymore. So Christians who don't save aren't really Christians anymore. There's a direct correlation between what we do and who we are. We can't call something salt if it doesn't do what salt does. And we can't call somebody a Christian if they don't do what Christians do. And that's the idea of the next part of the image as well. When Jesus calls us the light of the world, he immediately starts talking about the use of light and how we don't hide it, but instead use it so that people can see. So Jesus is making the same point with two different images. Just as with salt, light has a specific use, and without that use, it's not truly light. The purpose of light is to help people see. And that's also our purpose as Christians. Like salt, we save, and like light, we show, we reveal. And so these two images that Jesus chose were not random. They not only show us that what we are is based on what we do, but also what we're supposed to do. And so this short passage is packed with meaning for us, because we learn that what kind of people we're supposed to be is people who save and people who reveal. And so like salt, we're called to preserve the world, and like light, we're called to reveal the truth that is found in Jesus Christ. So what does it mean, specifically, for us to be the light of the world? First, and this is a really big, really important point, I think, we have to remember that we are only the light of the world because of the light that's within us. Jesus Christ is the true light of the world. And he uses that same phrase when talking about his followers, which means that people are meant to see Jesus in and through us. The whole world was in darkness until the true light came and brought light into the world. And we can't forget that we are the light of the world only because of Jesus, not because of our own value. And so that should remind us to keep ourselves humble and focused on Jesus. Because as Jesus says in verse 16, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. We perform good deeds and share the light not for our glory, but for God's glory. Right? People are to see Jesus Christ in us. That's what we illuminate. Our good deeds, the things that we do, right? Salt and light we're doing, and those things that we do point people to God. They reveal God to other people. And so we have this calling to be the light of the world and this calling to be the salt of the earth. And so in order for us to be Christians, we must do as Christ did, which is to save the world. We offer the world the salvation that Christ has made possible. And that happens through the church. It doesn't happen through individuals. I mean, individuals make up the church, of course. But it's in the church that people find the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And that means that we, as the church, have a huge responsibility to live like Jesus and draw people into this community, so that through our shared life and community of love and grace, they will see the light that is God, and they will come to be preserved and saved from the rot and decay of sin. So as the salt of the earth, we are called to be the people who bring salvation to the world. And as the light of the world, as people living with the light of Christ within us, we're called to drive out the darkness with our light. We're called to drive out the hatred with our love. And so this year, hopefully, we're still near the beginning of the year, let's make this a year that we set our lamp on a stand so that the whole house is illuminated. Let's make this the year that we become the salt of the earth and that we, as a community, preserve those in need. Let's ask the question, how can I best shine my light so that I can reveal the grace and glory of God to others? Let's pray for strength and grace from God to help us shine our light boldly and to be the salt of the earth and not lose our saltiness, so that the whole world will see Jesus and will be saved and glorify our Father in heaven. Now I invite you